Deangelo.
Well, that was a wonderful introduction, Mariah, and let me respond by talking a little bit about Canna Moms. That moment that Mariah described was a really compelling and moving moment for me. I walked into this conference and I was a little bit late. And I walked in and I saw this group of moms, and they were sitting on the floor and they had their kids with them. And somebody came up to me and said that they had just presented about their kids. And I went up and started talking to them and was just immediately drawn to them. I had to sit down, I had to get to know these kids, I had to get to know the moms, and the story that they spun out to me was just, it was simultaneously incredibly inspiring and really horrifying, because here you had these mothers, right, who were dealing with every parent's worst nightmare. And for those of you who haven't been close to a family that has a severely ill child, now it's occupies almost all of the emotional space, the time, bandwidth, everything in the life of this family becomes focused around the child, appropriately so. But then, on top of being able to give this highly elevated level of care to their children, here's this group of mothers who then, in a very hostile state, finds the courage to stand up and publicly demand that their children get the medicine that they need to end their suffering and possibly to save their lives. And not only do they find the energy and the love to do that, right, but then they find the courage and the energy and the love to keep on going and standing up for all of the other kids and all of the other moms who are out there who are in the same situation. I can't think of a better example of maternal love. They are goddesses, all of them, incarnations of the divine feminine. I came 3,000 miles to be with them, and with you here tonight, I gladly would have gone all the way around the world if I had to. So I also would like to recognize and thank all of the sponsors of this event for their generosity in helping make it happen. I'd like to thank Jorge and Suzanne for welcoming us into this beautiful space. Is this an amazing space or what? And I'd also like to say a special thank you to WomenGrow, which is another one of my very favorite organizations in the cannabis industry. You know, the cannabis industry is this very unique thing because it's an industry that's growing out of a social movement. And think about that. Think of other social movements. They don't usually end up yielding industries that generate billions and billions of dollars. So it's a very special thing, and in my view, that industry that we're building should reflect the values that we have been standing up for, that we've been fighting for all of these years. And the progress that we've been making is really, really incredible. When I started doing this, we were doing smoke-ins outside the White House, and cops were coming and hauling us away, and we were being more ridiculed by the press than anything else, right? And now we're winning elections. We're winning elections. And now that we're winning elections, right, we're going from collecting signatures and campaigning and petitioning to writing business plans and raising funds and developing new types of cannabis medicines and new ways for people to ingest it. We're making this move from a movement into an industry. And, you know, we all know because we hear about it all the time, that there's going to be a lot of money made as cannabis becomes legal, as we bring all of this underground economic activity into the mainstream of American commerce. And that's great. I'm all for that. I think it's a wonderful thing. I believe that profit-making industry is going to be one of the most powerful engines of social change that we've ever seen. But that opportunity to make money, I guess I do. All right. But that opportunity to make money isn't the greatest opportunity that we have. The greatest opportunity that we have stems from the fact that we're creating this thing that we don't really know what it's going to be yet, but we're creating it from scratch, from the very, very beginning. So how many times does a group of people like us have the opportunity to get together and think about and actually have an important influence on what an industry that's going to employ hundreds of thousands of people and generate tens, hundreds of billions of dollars is going to look like? How is it going to operate? What kind of values will it embody? And what I think is that it's really important that we don't just create another industry that looks like every other industry in America, right? We did not get created just out of the profit motive. We grew out of a social movement, right? So we don't need just a new industry. We need a new kind of industry. We need an industry that embraces diversity because it understands that diversity is a strength, not because it's some legal obligation that they have to grudgingly embrace, right? We need an industry that understands that sustainability is a critical, no, not a critical, it's the first threshold part of any business operation, because if you're not going to be sustainable, we don't want you. We're all a part of this world. We want a new kind of industry that spreads the wealth, that spreads the wealth, that spreads the wealth. We don't need monopolies where 10 or 15 or 20 people get designated with licenses and golden tickets. What we need is a pathway to real change. And I think that working together, we can do that. Now, I attend lots of events all over the country. And as we started moving from the movement into the industry, and I started going to more and more industry events as opposed to movement events, I started looking out into the audience, and what I saw disturbed me. It disturbed me, because almost everybody in that audience was a white guy, around my age, who already had a pretty good amount of money and some success in their life. I didn't see very many women. I didn't see very many people of color. I saw a lot of excitement. I saw a lot of talk about all of the money that was going to be made, but I didn't see any women in the room. And that really disturbed me. Right? I am the proud son of a feminist mother. So that bothered me. So I started talking about it, right? I started talking to people, and I started getting up on stage and complaining about it and collaring people in hallways and saying, you know, we got to do something about this. And no, I'm not going to appear on the panel unless you have at least 2 women on the panel to appear with all the men, right? And people started coming up to me, and they were like, okay, so what can I do? How can I deal with this? You're right, Steve. Okay? What are we going to do about it? Well, I didn't really know. I mean, I knew that there was a problem, right? But I didn't know what the solution was. And, you know, I've got 3 businesses that I'm running and 2 federal cases with the feds that I'm still fighting and, you know, a bunch of other stuff going on in my life. So I didn't have a lot of spare time to sit down and start figuring it out, right? And then Jasmine Hupp and Jane West showed up. Bless them, right? They had a way. they had an answer. They had a way for people to plug in. And the amount of energy that that organization has generated over the course of time since its founding has just been remarkable. I don't think I've ever seen a more rapid trajectory of growth of any organization in the cannabis movement or the cannabis industry. Right? Amazing work. So I'm really pleased that WomenGrow is here in Florida, that there are so many strong, smart, inspiring women who are associated with it. I'm so impressed. And you know, I'm impressed with us as an industry and as a movement too. Like at such a young age, we have enough self-awareness to see an issue like this and to point it out to each other and to start taking corrective action. That's really a change. It's a change. And I believe that one of the reasons that change is happening is generational. We are blessed, I think, now to have what I call the smartest generation. They are the smartest generation in the history of humankind. They have an unparalleled ability to collect information, facts, science, right? They can collect it, and they've been able to collect it since they were babies. They've grown up with keyboards in their hands. Their brains have been connected to this vast database. And so they've gotten really good at extracting that information, at thinking about it, at synthesizing it into new concepts and new ideas, and then taking those new ideas and those new concepts and pushing them out to each other and then acting on them and getting things done. So I think that one of the reasons that we're seeing this acceleration in the cannabis movement is because we have amongst us now the smartest generation. Now, our generations deserve a little credit for inventing computers and giving them to them, right? And I'm also really inspired by the other end of the demographic spectrum. You know, for a long time we've been looking at cannabis polls and we've been seeing that the demographic that is most opposed to cannabis reform is seniors, is elders, okay? But we know that seniors and elders are the people that need cannabis medicine amongst the worst, right? Just take a look at any list. You can go online, take a look at the list of most common senior health complaints, right? It's the same list as what cannabis is good for. And anybody heard about the Israeli nursing home study? Right? Incredible, okay, incredible. What I love about that study, I think more than anything else, was that the patients who were overweight lost weight. And the patients who were underweight gained weight, right? And so it's this beautiful example of the modulating ability of the endocannabinoid system to restore homeostasis. It's one of my favorite stories about the endocannabinoid system. So I'm not going to talk too much with prepared remarks because I really want to hear what's on your minds and have a little bit more of a dialogue and a conversation than a one-way lecture. But I do want to talk a little bit about community and unity and hanging together and working through our issues with each other. You know, Florida is like, well, it's like just about every other state that I've ever been in the cannabis reform movement, right? We have a lot of different groups, we have a lot of different individuals who care deeply and passionately about this issue, whose lives have been moved and changed by cannabis on very, very deep levels. They come from all different backgrounds, they come with all different skill sets, they all come with their own strengths and their own weaknesses, and their own approaches and their own opinions. And sometimes we see heat and friction within our own community around what we're going to do with this initiative, or what are we going to do with that initiative, or what's the right wording on this, or who are we going to back in this election, or who's going to be the chairman of this organization. There's a lot of heat and friction that can happen. And sometimes it just happens because, you know, one group in one end of the state starts working on the same thing at the same time that somebody on the other end of the state starts working on it, and they both get so far down that they don't want to let go of their individual plans. Understandable, right? Understandable stuff. I think one of the One of the deepest causes of this, though, has to do with this transition that we're in the cannabis movement. You know, for years and years and years, to be a cannabis activist, you had to be almost half crazy, right? You had to be almost half crazy. You had to be one of these people who, like, when you were convinced that something was right, there's nothing on God's earth that is going to convince you to change your mind ever, right? It was an essential psychic, emotional quality to have in those years, in the 1980s and the 1990s, when we were going backwards, when we saw people being hauled off to prison, when we saw recriminalization instead of a decriminalization, right? You had to have that in order to survive. But we're in a new time now. It's not that way now. We are in a place now where we're able to reach out to people that we never thought we would be able to reach out to. We're changing minds that we thought would be closed forever and ever and ever. We are not moving backwards. We are galloping forwards. Right? And that's a great thing. That's a wonderful thing. Best thing that's ever happened to me my whole damn life, actually. But it's a new time, and it calls for a new mentality. And so for a lot of us who grew up in those years, who learned how to be uncompromising, who learned how to never bend, who would fight until the very end, we need to learn some new skills. We need to learn the art of dialogue. We need to learn the art of compromise. We need to keep in mind the lessons that this plant teaches us. It's taught all of us, right? The way that it can bridge human differences. You know? The way that it teaches us to be tolerant of each other. The understanding that each human being has their own path. And they should be allowed to walk that path unless it crosses in some really horrible, serious way somebody else's path. Let each person find their own way through this world and their own path. Plant teaches us to be kind, and it teaches us to be gentle, and it teaches us to be forgiving. And so, as you all work together on the various different initiative plans, on all of the different organizations that are going to be coming together, remember these lessons. Because we can't afford to lose elections anymore, ever again. Not another single one. So, what's on your mind? Some questions? For those of you who haven't read my book, I totally reject the dichotomy between recreational and medical cannabis. In fact, it's one plant. It's one plant. It's the same thing, okay? The laws might be written differently and have different ideas about it, but we know that it is one plant in the end. I like to think about the concept of wellness instead of recreational versus medical. And so the way that this concept came to me was, you know, I had people coming up to me, I had patients coming up to me in the dispensary who had medical cards. And they would come up to me and go, Steve, I totally support medical cannabis. I'm all about it. I know that there's lots of people who would be really sick, could die, their lives would be horrible, they go to the hospital without it, but you know me, I'm not really a patient. I just like to get high. Telling me this in the dispensary, right? I'm like, all right, come on over here, let's have a little conversation. How do you use cannabis? When? How has it changed your life? How has it made your life better? And I'll get a story that goes kind of something like this. And there's a bunch of experiences put together, but it goes something like this. Well, Steve, you know, I'll get off of work at the end of the day without cannabis. This is the without cannabis part, right? Get off work at the end of the day. I might be pissed off or frustrated. Maybe I had a fight with the boss, or I just didn't get everything done that I wanted to get done that day. So I'm kind of frustrated, irritated at the end of the day, and you get in rush hour traffic, my stomach gets sour, my back starts aching. I'm not looking forward to going home and telling my wife what a lousy day I had, or having the kids climb all over me, or you know, don't think I can eat anything because my stomach is upset. And when I get home, oftentimes my stomach is upset, and I'm not really too happy to see anybody. After dinner, I'll go and sit in front of the TV, and usually I pass out, and then I'll sort of doze off, and wake up a little later and go into the bedroom. My wife will be kind of irritated, and I'll sleep for a few hours, or maybe I won't sleep for a few hours, and then I get up the next morning, and it's another day. But with cannabis things are different, right? I'm not irritated and frustrated at the end of the day, no matter what has happened. My stomach's not sour when I'm sitting there in rush hour traffic, and my back is not aching. I'm looking forward to going home and reuniting with my wife, and when I get there, I have as much fun playing with my kids as they do playing with me. I always enjoy my dinner, no matter what my wife makes. After dinner, we put the kids to bed. A little bit of extra special intimate time because of the cannabis. We go to sleep in each other's arms. I wake up the next morning refreshed and ready to take on the world. My life is really different with cannabis. But what happens if this patient goes to your average MD and tells them the same story, right? Oh, anxiety, depression, rheumatoid arthritis, acid reflux, insomnia, low testosterone, erectile dysfunction, and the list goes on and on, right? So, yeah, and we see these pharmaceuticals. That what would happen is you would be given a list of these pharmaceuticals, and we see these things advertised on TV every night, right? And real problem, because most of them don't work that well, and they have a list of side effects like something out of a Stephen King novel. Okay, we know that cannabis is a safer alternative and a more effective alternative in many cases. So that's one part of wellness. But the other part of wellness, I think we really need to look into our own minds and sort of rejigger the way that we think about these things. So, I think that a lot of the things that folks consider being a part of getting high are actually a part of wellness. So think about the ability of cannabis to extend your patience, or wake up your sense of play, right? Or open you to a more fulfilling spiritual experience, or promote intimacy, or enhance the flavor of a meal, or the sound of music, or your connection with nature. This isn't about intoxication. These are about the most precious, most meaningful, most important parts of our lives. So that's some of the reasons I cringe when I hear this term recreational cannabis. I also cringe because it's like every living creature on the planet has an endocannabinoid system, with the exception of insects. Every living creature has an endocannabinoid system. And that endocannabinoid system in human beings is the largest neurotransmitter system in the human body. It is the reason that cannabis is effective for so many different ailments. So it boggles the mind, at least it boggles my mind, that anybody could suggest that a substance that interacts with the largest neurotransmitter system in the human body could be considered an optional leisure time recreational pursuit. And what's the real problem? What's the real problem with this recreational idea? The real problem is that if it's recreational, it's optional. And if it's optional, then somebody can take it away. And they can take it away, they have the right to take it away, but nobody has the right to take this plant away from us, or any other healing botanical, ever. It's not about getting high, it's about being well. So I know that was a really long way around this question. But I think that the answer is that we really need clarity of thinking, because I know that the people that are using cannabis quote-unquote recreationally and the people who are using cannabis quote-unquote medically are using the same plant for the same reason. So brothers and sisters, it's time for some clarity of thinking and understanding in our own community. The prohibitionists like the idea of recreational cannabis. That fits their agenda. We should reject it thoroughly. So instead, let's talk about adult use. Let's talk about wellness. Let's talk about getting people who are on the recreational side and on the medical side in the same room, maybe consuming some cannabis with each other, and talking this thing through and remembering those lessons that the plant teaches us about tolerance, about kindness, and about gentleness when we're dealing with each other. The question is, you know, how should we handle some of the state regulations that are essentially setting up monopolies in the cannabis industry? There is a battle going on now for the soul of the cannabis industry, and it's going to be a fierce battle, and everybody who loves and cares about cannabis should be involved in it. Even folks who never thought that they would be involved in business, no way, no how, ever. Because it's time for good souls to come together and make sure that this thing that we're building is really worthy. You know, my favorite story about this is what happened in Ohio, right? So what happened in Ohio, for those of you who didn't hear, is a bunch of jokers who had a few years ago run an initiative in Ohio that gave them gambling licenses. It gave casino licenses to like 5 designated particular individuals who were the individuals who funded the initiative campaign. They thought that was a really great business model. It worked for gambling, so hell, we'll try it with cannabis. So they took that idea out to the voters. And of course, imagine now. Imagine the choice. You're in Ohio. You're a cannabis consumer. You may be a medical cannabis patient. You may have done time. You may have relatives in prison. And you are faced with the prospect, and this is what voters were faced with, of either voting to end prohibition and give the cannabis industry into the hands of these monopolists, right? Or voting no and continuing to endure prohibition for a little while longer. Well, they said no. We are not going to take your monopoly. We are not going to take an industry that looks like every other industry that's been created in America. We are not going to run the wealth that's being created here back to people who are already so rich that they have too much money, they don't know what to do with it. Voters said no. So that was really inspiring, because I know that was a tough choice for a lot of people. Now there's an effort underway in Ohio, which I believe will be successful, that will be a real, reasonable, rational law. Same thing's going on in California. We've got the alcohol distributors who have convinced the legislature in California to put in this mandatory required distributor level of cannabis, right? So growers won't be able to sell to dispensaries anymore. They have to sell to a distributor, and then the distributor takes it to like an extractor, and then it goes back to the distributor, and then it goes to the manufacturer, and then it goes back to the distributor, and so on and so forth. 15 to 35% charge at each level, right? So these guys who have done nothing They've lifted not a single finger, and in some cases the alcohol industry have done everything they could to stop these laws from being changed, now want to parachute in and take some huge portion of the revenue. And what's worse is they come up with these insane business models that are going to double or triple the price of cannabis. And it won't work anyhow. So the same thing has happened in Florida. Unfortunately, in Florida, there's the initiative process. I don't know, well, can you fix that with the initiative process? You're trying to do it with two. It's the same thing that I see around the country. And essentially the way that people have to deal with it is by really being uncompromising about it and taking this message out to the news media, taking this message out to other organizations. There's a big sentiment in this country right now that the wealth should be spread around, that politics should not be used as a business tool. You can see it in the Republican Party, and you can see it in the Democratic Party, okay? It is happening. So we can tap into that sentiment, and we should tap into that sentiment, because the same game is being played on us that's been played on everybody else. And I think we need to aggressively take that message out there. And if people accuse us of slowing down reform along the way, I think we just need to respond that what we want is real reform. Did you have a comment? Came out of the activist community. It was the activist community. The only people who had really a motive to stand up and put that information out. And like I said, it was hard for activists to do because it put you in a position potentially of being accused of supporting prohibition. So let's just get clear. 2 gets rid of the monopolies, or it sets up a system in addition to the monopolies? Okay, all right. So, okay, so let's be clear. What happened is the legislature passed a bill and created these essentially monopolies. The people are going to have a chance to vote in November for a medical cannabis bill that does not include those monopolies. Is that correct, Mike? Okay. So those of you who do not like the idea of monopolies, make sure that you drill down on 2. Okay, great. That was, I think, a healthy conversation. And it's exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about here. And these are the kind of conversations that we need to have with each other so that we can move together as a community. I don't know, maybe they need like better cannabis or something. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make light of the question. I'm a little surprised by it because my experience with millennials is that, like, when it comes to cannabis, they're very, very enthusiastic. I would probably sit them down and give them a good talking to and say, look, are you kidding me? You've got the internet, you've got Twitter, you've got every social media platform in the world, you've got access to all of the information in the world. You have power in this generation to make change like no generation in human history has ever had. Don't talk to me about blowing that opportunity by sitting on your butts. I would give them a good talking to. Yeah, you know, the CBD is a area of federal law which is vague and ambiguous to begin with, and it is rapidly shifting. And there have been recent actions against CBD manufacturers, sparked and partly because other pharmaceutical CBD preparations are beginning to make their way through the FDA pipeline, and that they've used that as one of the reasons for the crackdown. That said, you know, there was a problem with a lot of companies who were sourcing their CBD extracts from industrial hemp byproducts. And the problem with that is that industrial hemp is grown typically with fertilizers. It concentrates heavy metals, and upon analysis, it was found that a lot of these CBD products had really dangerous levels of heavy metals in them, and frequently didn't have the CBD content that was supposed to be there. You can get a really good report on that from Project CBD, and they sort of outline some of that. So it's a little bit of a gray and murky area. There's a sign of hope on the horizon, though, that the Farm Bill that was passed by Congress recently includes a provision in it that is going to allow any of the hemp that is grown, and right now you're allowed to grow hemp in cannabis legal states if it's part of a research project. So the Farm Bill will allow the hemp from those quote-unquote research projects to be sold interstate. And so we have the possibility of growing very large quantities of it in places like California and Colorado. And if interstate commerce is allowed, then we would be able to get those products to other states where there's not so much access. That said, CBD is not a panacea. In our experience, we found that CBD alone, without any other cannabinoids, is nowhere near as effective as medications that have an entourage effect in them. And I think that, you know, frequently the CBD-only laws have been embraced by the most reactionary lawmakers as a way to stop further reform. So the whole area and issue of CBD is something where it really takes a lot of study on a pretty consistent basis to keep up with all the twists and turns in that part of the cannabis world. Well, people might have been retailing it, but it's never been clear under federal law that was legal. If you call the DEA and ask them, they will tell you that CBD is a controlled substance. They will. I mean, you know, they absolutely will. Are we talking about the presidential campaign? Okay. Well, look, the choice is very clear in the presidential campaign. We, for the very first time, have a presidential candidate in a major party who I believe still has a chance at being nominated, who has embraced not only rescheduling of cannabis, not only supports medical cannabis, but has called for the complete and total removal of cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act entirely, right? I'm a one-issue guy. I'm a one-issue guy. And so there's no doubt about who I'm voting for president. Right? So if we take a look at Donald Trump, the likely Republican candidate, I could tell you a little story. I was in Sacramento a few weeks ago testifying on a measure that they were considering, part of the medical cannabis regulations. And speaker after speaker got up and gave fairly well-reasoned viewpoints. Everybody had different opinions, and some people liked this and didn't like that, but everybody was fairly reasonable and rational, right? And I was sitting down, and I sort of zoned off a little bit, right? Because it's hot, and you're hearing this stuff for hours and hours. And But then I start hearing this like totally different cadence and this totally different vocabulary and this totally different rhythm, right? And I look over and here's this maniac from the Make America Great Foundation spouting off stuff that could have come straight out of the mouth of Harry Anslinger, right? Straight out of the mouth. Everybody know who Harry Anslinger was? Okay, the original Reefer Madness dude. And this guy got up and with a huge amount of passion and conviction, you could tell that he believed it. He really, really believed it. And he was just talking about crime and addiction and insanity and, you know, basically the decline of Western civilization. And he really believed it. Trump, who knows what Trump believes or doesn't believe, okay? What I worry about is Trump's constituency, is the people who believe in Trump and who ultimately are his power base, right? And I think that those folks, probably very few of them understand the truth about cannabis. Yes, one more.
Hi, South Florida WomenGrow here. And,
Yeah.
in our practice, we're trying to concentrate on reaching the elderly with college medicine, medically, and so on and so forth. So I want to know how you've been successful in doing that if you have been.
So what you need is a trusted ambassador. When Harborside first started doing outreach to the senior community, the first thing that we did was get a booth at a senior health fair. And we went down and we set up our booth the same way that we, you know, always do at all of our events. We put up our usual display and we had our staff there who, you know, none of them are 75 years old. And we were, you know, we're going to take this information to the seniors. They need it so much. And it was a nice sunny day. And nobody stopped at the booth. It was like, no, Mildred, come this way, you know. And, you know, I started thinking about it, right? And I was like, okay, like you got a few miles. You're 75, you're 80, you're 85 years old. And you got some kid who's 25 years old who's going to start teaching you lessons about your health care. Doesn't really compute. So I was really fortunate to be able to reach out to an amazing woman named Sue Taylor. Sue is in her late 60s now. She was in her early 60s then. Former Catholic elementary school principal, African-American woman who is one of the most elegant, well-presented people that I've ever seen in my life, who had a real passion for senior wellness already. So she was a senior wellness advocate, trying to convince seniors not to take as many pharmaceuticals, to exercise, to think about diet, when her son turned her on to medical cannabis. And I was able to convince Sue to become our senior outreach coordinator. And it was a long process, right? Because it turned out that before we could really get meaningful access to seniors, we had to go to the gatekeepers. So there's a lot of gatekeepers in the senior community: nursing home administrators, aging commissions, advocacy organizations. And those are the folks that you go to first, and you engage with them, because if you try and engage directly with the seniors, the gatekeepers are going to make your life really, really difficult. So go to the gatekeepers, focus on them, see if you can get on the aging commission or get one of your people on the aging commission. It's frequently not that difficult to do. Get a little bit of donations flowing to some of the senior advocacy organizations. Even a small donation, those organizations don't get much, so that means something. You know, demonstrate some caring in the community, and recruit some ambassadors who are seniors. Who can really effectively engage with other seniors and speak their language. Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you to Steve Deangelo. Everyone, please.